The first child of Joyce and Lionel Dahmer was born in Milwaukee, Wisconsin on May 21st, 1960, just before their first anniversary. His name was Jeffrey.
It was a very happy time when Jeff was first born, and for a couple of months it was like everything was brand new and very, very enjoyable and happy, looking forward to the future.
While Jeff's father pursued his chemistry degree, Jeff grew into a bright and loving child.
He was very exuberant. He liked to wrestle. He liked to run around and ham it up for the camera. And he liked to play with kids. He liked to get together with them. And he was very outgoing.
Jeff was also an extremely curious child.
He seemed to want to play with things and feel things and get to know their texture, and he seemed to be very much in tune with what's around him. He just wanted to know what was going on.
He had a fascination with animals as a youngster. Once, 4-year-old Jeff watched his father collect the bones of small animals that had died under the house.
I brought him out, put him in a metal pail just to collect them all in one place, and they dropped in with sort of a clanking noise, and Jeff seemed kind of interested in that noise, and he took a hold and let them drop down in too. You know, in retrospect, everything looks grim and dark and sinister. You know, like, could that be the start of something evil? Well, I have to admit, it's simply just the curiosity of a child.
Ohio, relocating 3 times before settling down on a nearly 2-acre wooded lot in the town of Bath, an hour's drive south of Cleveland. When Jeff was 10, his mother was hospitalized and treated for anxiety. From there, his parents' marriage began to fail. As he entered high school, his sexual fantasies traumatized him. To escape, he began drinking. On the way to classes in the morning, he would fill up a cup with hard liquor at a friend's house.
And I remember sitting next to him in a first period, I believe, history class, and he had a styrofoam cup of scotch, I believe it was scotch. I remember saying, "Jeff, what is that?" And he threw his head back and he shook it and he said, "It's my medicine." But clearly he was getting drunk at 8 o'clock in the morning.
For Jeffrey Dahmer, the summer of 1978 started with high school graduation. It would be downhill from there. His parents, after years of open and bitter fighting, divorced. Jeffrey's father, Lionel, moved out of the family house in Bath, Ohio, and into this nearby motel. Unbeknownst to Lionel, Jeff's mother took younger brother David and moved to Wisconsin. Jeffrey found himself home alone. Began to notice the previously gregarious Jeff had become shy and withdrawn.
He did seem to be awkward socially and just didn't.
Nature and small animals continued into his teenage years when he became curious about what they looked like on the inside. For specimens, he collected roadkill. Riding around the country roads in Bath, carrying garbage bags, Jeff searched for carcasses. Jeff brought the roadkill he found into the backyard of the house, and there in the secrecy of the woods, he dissected the animal. Teenage Jeff was discovering that he felt sexually attracted only to men, but the thoughts of sex with men became interlocked with fantasies of killing another man and dismemberment. The fantasies excited him, but they were unspeakable.
I think it was around age 14 or 15. Started having obsessive thoughts of violence intermingled with sex. And it just got worse and worse. I didn't know how to tell anyone about it, so I didn't. I just kept it all inside.
At the library, a man handed him a note offering sexual favors. Dahmer declined, but he would later say the note was a turning point. It awakened sexual desires deep inside him. Specifically, he wanted the submissive company of another male. He wanted someone to fulfill his sexual needs, but he didn't want to be burdened by anyone else's needs. Jeffrey started with a perfectly submissive partner. He stole a store window mannequin. He kept the plastic man in his closet, bringing it out to masturbate onto until his grandmother found it and insisted he get rid of it. On his free nights, Jeffrey began exploring gay life in Milwaukee, browsing through porn shops and going to bathhouses. The bath clubs catered mostly to men seeking anonymous sex. To make his partners there submissive, Jeffrey gave them drinks laced with sleeping pills. When they fell unconscious, he would lie down next to them, listening to the sounds of their bodies, their heartbeats, their stomachs. But the drugging experiments ended when one man overdosed and spent a week in the hospital. Jeff was asked never to return to the club. He devised a plan to build a shrine out of skeletons and skulls, but he was still in search of the perfect partner, one who was completely submissive but alive and not prone to decay. He gained a reputation as the class clown. Acting out in a bizarre or unexpected manner became known at his school as, quote, doing a Dahmer.
All of a sudden you'd be walking down the hall and you'd hear someone yelling and hollering and running through the hallway, and it's Jeff Dahmer in the middle of the day, running, flapping his arms, yelling, hurricane drill, everybody hide.
At one point, Jeff collected money from classmates in exchange for a show at the mall.
And a woman is handing out samples of sunflower seeds, and Jeff is taking one and then another and being very polite like he always was, and then just spits them out all over the place and starts yelling at the top of his lungs, I'm allergic, I'm allergic, I'm allergic, and runs away.
Jeff was sent to stay with his father's mother near Milwaukee. There, he seemed to find some stability at last, making a concentrated effort to turn his life around. He stopped drinking, went to church with his grandmother, and he fought what he believed were immoral homosexual urges, which eventually led to his inescapable fantasies about murder. Dahmer even found jobs, first at a blood bank and then working nights as a chocolate mixer in a candy factory. But the lifestyle of church-going and right living, as he called it, didn't last. Just weeks after graduation, Jeffrey picked up a hitchhiker along the road. It was 18-year-old Stephen Hicks.
I wish I just kept on going, but I didn't. Turned around, picked him up, and that's when the nightmare became a reality.
Jeffrey invited Hicks back to the house. They drank beers and spent a couple of hours just hanging out. Then Hicks said he had to go. But Jeffrey didn't want to be alone. He attacked Hicks, knocking him out with a barbell. And then he strangled him. Dahmer had fulfilled his fantasy, but he was lucid enough to know that he had committed a murder. He quickly began to hide the evidence. He dismembered Hicks' body with a knife, a skill he had practiced as a younger teen with roadkill. He put the pieces into trash bags and loaded them into his car in the middle of the night. He was heading for a dump site when he was pulled over by the police for drifting across the center line. The officers asked Jeff what was in the bags and why he was out so late. Jeff was trapped for the first time, but he was ready with a lie. He coolly told the cops he was troubled by his parents' divorce and couldn't sleep, so he thought a trip to the dump would take his mind off things. The police let him go with a ticket. Jeff returned home, racked with guilt over the murder. He stashed the bones of Stephen Hicks under the house for 2 weeks. Then he smashed them to bits with a sledgehammer. Behind the house, Jeff spun in a circle, tossing the fragments among the leaves and brush. In November 1987, Dahmer met 25-year-old Steve Toomey at a downtown club called 219. After a few drinks, they left the bar for a night at the nearby Ambassador Hotel. Dahmer used an old trick to get Toomey into the submissive state he craved.
I had put some sleeping pills in his drink to render him conscious, and was just going to spend the night with him. When I woke up in the morning, my forearms were bruised, and his chest was bruised, and blood was coming out of his mouth. He was hanging over the side of the bed, And I have no memory of beating him to death, but I must have.
But Dahmer didn't panic. He went out and bought the biggest suitcase he could find. At the hotel, he crammed Toomey's body into the case, dragged it into a taxi, went back to his grandmother's house, and dismembered Toomey in the basement. At a bus stop outside 219, he met 14-year-old James Doc Stater. Dahmer offered him $50 to spend the night with him. They took the bus back to Dahmer's grandmother's. While she slept, Jeff and Doc Stater had oral sex. Then Dahmer drugged and strangled him, his preferred method for killing.
He stated in no way did he ever want to hurt anybody. As funny as this sounds, that is the reason why he killed everyone by strangling them, because not only did he get the power and the thrill of committing the murder, but it was also the most humane way.
With Doc Stater, Dahmer further explored his dark fantasies. He hid the body in the basement for a week and continued to have sex with it. Once James Doc Stater began to decay, Dahmer dismembered him in the basement near a floor drain, just as he had with Toomey. He took an apartment on Milwaukee's west side and immediately accelerated his downward spiral when he approached a 13-year-old boy on a street and lured him into the apartment. Inside, Dahmer scared the boy by fondling him, and the youngster ran from the apartment. Dahmer was convicted on second-degree sexual assault charges only. The murders were still his secret. He was sentenced to 1 year in a work release program that required him to spend his nights in a prison dormitory while he continued working at the chocolate factory. In the 10 days before he began his sentence, Dahmer struck again. He met 26-year-old Anthony Sears at the gay club La Cage and killed him. He mummified Sears' head and genitals and kept them inside his locker at the chocolate factory. Towards the end of the work release term, Jeff's father wrote to the judge and urged him to put Jeff in an alcoholic treatment program, writing, "I have tremendous reservations regarding Jeff's chances when he hits the streets." No program was ordered. Jeff was released 2 months early. He moved into another low-income neighborhood in Milwaukee. The rent at the Oxford Apartments was cheap, and the location was close to the gay clubs. On his own again, he was free to feed his relentless sexual urges. Within 3 weeks of his release, Dahmer began a 1-year killing frenzy. He would leave 13 more families, most of them African-American, searching for loved ones who had simply disappeared. The police, too, searched in vain.
Once Jeff started on his killing spree, all of his financial resources, all of his time, money, effort, desires, emotions, thoughts went into his secret world of killing people and keeping them with him. Many times he talked about trying to fight it, even after he had killed a couple people, saying how he wasn't going to do it again, but within a month he would be back out at the bar stalking.
One victim almost got away. Dahmer had drugged 14-year-old Konorak Synthasamphone, the brother of the boy Dahmer had been jailed for molesting the year before. As Konorak slept, Dahmer went out to buy more liquor. But while he was gone, the teen woke up. He staggered out into the street naked. A concerned neighbor called 911.
Milwaukee Emergency Operator 71.
Okay, hi. I'm on 25th and State, and this is young man. He is butt naked. He has been beaten up. He is very bruised up. He can't stand. He's study fall out. He is butt naked. He has no clothes on. He was really hurt.
Police arrived. By this time, Dahmer had returned from his beer run. As he had with police in Bath, Ohio after his first killing, Dahmer smoothly lied. He told police that Konorak was his gay lover who simply had too much to drink. He brought the cops into his apartment and showed them Polaroids he'd taken of the teen, proof, he said, of their relationship. The police believed the 14-year-old was of legal age and left him behind with Dahmer. They wrote the incident off as a lover's quarrel. Again, Dahmer had been slippery enough to keep his killings a secret. As soon as the cops left, he murdered the boy. Inside Dahmer's apartment, the bodies began to pile up. So he bought a 57-gallon drum and filled it with a powerful acid to dissolve the dismembered limbs and torsos. After weeks in the acid, the remains of Dahmer's would-be lovers became sludge, which he flushed down the toilet or the bathtub drain. For others, Jeffrey boiled the skin off their bones on the stove. A sweet, bitter odor of death began to infest the building, and many tenants traced the smells straight to Dahmer's door. On a few still living victims, Dahmer used a power drill to open small holes in their skulls. Then he injected acid into their brains. According to Dahmer, none of his experimental zombies lived longer than a day. And in perhaps the ultimate effort to keep his victims with him, Dahmer began eating their flesh.
It made me feel like they were a permanent part of me. Besides the just mere curiosity of what it would be like, it made them feel that they were a part of me, and it gave me a sexual satisfaction to do that.
One man, Tracy Edwards, had managed to escape from the horrors of Dahmer's apartment and flag down a passing patrol car. When the officers entered the apartment, they found 83 Polaroids of bodies in various stages of dismemberment. There were more shocking discoveries in the kitchen.
There were 4 fully enfleshed skulls still there, sitting in a refrigerator. One of the officers said he opened the icebox. He heard a scream. It was only later that he realized that it was he himself who had screamed.
TV news cameras rolled as what was left of the victims was carried out. The 57-gallon drum filled with the torsos of 3 men. A freezer with dismembered limbs and flesh. Metal cooking pots with mummified hands and genitals. This time, there was no lie Dahmer could tell to save himself. Dahmer spent the next 6 weeks with the detectives recounting the murders of 17 men, a 159-page confession. It seemed cathartic to Dahmer to finally get the deeds of the last 13 years off his chest. With the information from his confession, investigators went back to Dahmer's childhood home in Bath, Ohio. They raked up the shattered bones of Stephen Hicks, Dahmer's first victim. The Milwaukee County coroner started matching skulls with torsos, and the police began the sad task of notifying families. Dahmer pleaded guilty but insane. The issue of his sanity would be the sole question before the jury.
You know immediately that it's going to be probably an insanity defense. What can you argue? You can't claim self-defense. You can't say you don't know how those bodies got there.
Wisconsin had no death penalty, so if the jury found him sane, he would spend the rest of his life in prison. If they found him insane, he would be imprisoned in a mental facility. The man who entered the Milwaukee County courtroom in January 1992 appeared completely normal, until the words of his confession were read in court by Lieutenant Dennis Murphy.
He related this was a person he really liked. He indicated that he had filleted his heart and kept it in the freezer, and he also kept his bicep. He indicated that he had eaten the thigh muscle of this subject, but it was so tough he could hardly chew it. He then purchased a meat tenderizer and used it on the bicep.
Dahmer's father, Lionel, sat in the courtroom beside his second wife, Sherry, stunned by what he heard.
No one softened the blow for us. No one told us, no one prepared us with any of these details. How could this be? How could I have not known about it?
Dahmer's crimes seemed to be devastating proof of insanity. What else could explain the actions of a man who had sex with the dead, dismembered their bodies, preserved their skulls, and ate their flesh, all for sexual gratification? But the law has a very strict interpretation of insanity. Dahmer's defense team had to prove 2 things. One, that he indeed suffered from a mental disease, and that it kept him from knowing right from wrong. Necrophilia, a compulsion to have sex with the dead, is recognized as a sexual disorder, but it does not make one legally insane.
He argued that the necrophilic drive was such that he could not control it. But we don't accept that in the United States as a defense, no more than we accept a pedophilic drive of the man who wants to have sex with children.
Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, I understand you have arrived at verdicts in this manner.
In a 10-2 decision, the jury found Jeffrey Dahmer legally sane. The judge sentenced Dahmer to a 937-year prison term, but it would last only a few tormented years. Within 3 weeks of his release, Dahmer began a one-year killing frenzy. He would leave 13 more families, most of them African-American, searching for loved ones who had simply disappeared. The police, too, searched in vain.
It's awful funny. Whatever Jeff was cooking, Jeff never bought no groceries. So what could he have been cooking that smelled like chitlins? Chitlins have a very peculiar, nasty odor to them, you know.
No one softened the blow for us. No one told us, no one prepared us with any of these details. How could this be? How could I have not known about it?
Some relatives of Dahmer's victims sat quietly in court, others cried. Prior to his sentencing, they were allowed to express themselves before the judge.
Jeffrey, I hate you! I hate you! Nothing's under control! Don't Jeffrey, I'll kill you! I'll kill you, mother! I can kill you!
What's your name, fast?
I can kill you!
Once order was restored, Dahmer spoke publicly for the first time.
I feel so bad for what I did to those poor families, and I understand their rightful hate. I have seen their tears, and if I could give my life right now to bring their loved ones back, I would do it. I am so very sorry.
Many questioned the emotional depth of Dahmer's apology, whether a man who killed so routinely had the conscience to feel remorse. Jeffrey Dahmer's final home was the Columbia Correctional Institution in Portage, Wisconsin. His former residence at the Oxford Apartments in Milwaukee stood as a painful reminder of the lives that ended there. So in November 1992, it was demolished.
There are shocking new details about the murder of America's most hated serial killer and how he may have seen his own death coming. Tonight, Diane Diamond reports on the plot to kill a killer.
I am happy and very excited that the monster is finally dead.
It was a brutal murder behind bars, a shocking lapse of prison security. And while correction officials promise an investigation, no one involved with the Jeffrey Dahmer case says that they're surprised.
I use the word hit, and that has been one of the rumors that has been running rampant, was that this was some sort of a hit.
Exactly what happened is still not clear. Dahmer was cleaning a prison bathroom with 2 other inmates when suddenly one of them apparently took a broom handle and started beating Dahmer to death. Prison officials say Dahmer's head may have been bashed against a wall.
There was so much animosity toward him with a number of the inmates were either jealous or resentful over his celebrity status that he had in prison.
Officials say it was this man, Christopher Scarver, who carried out Dahmer's death sentence.
How they caught the assailant is that he was covered with blood. There was apparently a great deal of blood at the scene.
Prison officials won't say why 3 guards assigned to the area left the inmates alone. But for now, they insist the guards did nothing wrong.
I am not surprised. I had predicted that he would be killed in prison because he had a death wish. He always had a death wish. He was a sick kid. He knew he was sick.
In recent months, Jeffrey Dahmer apparently had found religion. He was formally baptized in May, and in the prison chapel, he confided to the minister about how he was ready to accept the ultimate punishment.
Now that he's a Christian, and he felt personally that he deserved to be put to death for his crimes, the question was, am I sinning against God by continuing to live?
So it appears that Jeffrey Dahmer may have wanted to die, to end his tortured life, to rid himself of his inner demons. And to the families of his victims, Jeffrey Dahmer's death sentence finally brings an end to their private suffering.
Whoever did kill him, he's my hero. I will be sending a thank you card to this hero.
The autopsy on Jeffrey Dahmer says he died from multiple skull fractures.
The man who beat notorious serial killer and cannibal Jeffrey Dahmer to death inside a Wisconsin prison has spoken out for the first time in an interview with the New York Post, detailing what pushed him to the edge and why he ended up killing Mr. Dahmer. Jose, apparently, it was Mr. Dahmer's weird, creepy taunting that he would do to inmates as well as to the guards that ultimately got him killed.
I mean, this guy, besides all the things that he did before getting in prison, he had everyone fed up in the prison because he had this bad habit of coming and creeping up and poking people, leaving limbs behind. You know, he used crumbs and food remains to create limbs, cover them with ketchup so they look like blood, and leaving them for guards and inmates to find. Knowing his background, obviously that was very unnerving. What happened is that Scarver found himself cleaning a bathroom with Dahmer and another inmate called Jesse, and Dahmer was such a target inside the prison that he needed a guard with him at all times. In this moment, at time, the guard left. Scarver always kept a clipping, a news clip, of what Dahmer did, and he was always disgusted by it. So when the guard left, he confronted Dahmer and said, "Did you do this?" He said yes, and he grabbed a steel rod and hammered him to death.
Yeah, and it's hard to feel bad for somebody like Dahmer. So although they had never had much interaction between each other because they are in a prison, he had been such a high-profile inmate, everyone knew about what he did, and like you said, he was disgusted and he hated him because Dahmer was actually known for targeting African-Americans. A lot of his victims were African-Americans.
17, right?
Yeah.
17 boys and men, and a whole array of disgusting charges, necrophilia, collecting the bones, eating them. This is insane.
Oh, I mean, it's disgusting. So, according to Scarver, here's what he said. He said he crossed the line with some people who are in prison, they're repentant, but he was not one of them. So he didn't feel any remorse for the guy at all. Like you said, he went up to him when he said that he did it. He just beat him to death. He couldn't hold it back, and that's exactly what happened. So, I mean, new details coming out. So it's really interesting to see, the details of why this had to happen.
You know what
he's a poet now too. So
you know what I really like about this story is this element of vigilante justice made inside the prison.
Right.
And it lends itself to speculate, is this something that the guards kind of allow it to happen because he was so unlike inside the prison that it was very easy for them to say, well...
A lot of people say that the guards actually wanted him dead, and it's no coincidence that the one time he left him alone, he got killed. I mean, so we actually will probably never know the truth behind that, but yeah, a lot of people could say, like, hey, this was an inside job, the inmates were in cahoots with the guards.
But why is it that now, so many years after the fact, this happened in 94, 2015, now news are surfacing?
Like I was saying, he's a poet now, he's probably reformed, he's probably clearing his conscience, he's letting it out. I mean, that's my theory, I don't know. I mean,
some say that he's selling his poetry on Amazon and he needed a little bit of press.
That can also be a big thing. I wouldn't be surprised. Well, it's working because we're talking about it.